Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 17 of the show. Appreciate you guys being here. Appreciate you guys listening. Fun guest for you guys today. It's a little bit intricate, a little bit specific, but I wanted to talk a lot about, defense, both because Brian Flores in the start to this Viking season has been as phenomenal as it's been, but also because publicly and in the media, there's been a lot of narratives about offensive play and production being down. I kind of want to dive into that. So I had a guy named Cody Alexander on. Cody's a former football coach, both in college and high school. He has his own website now called MatchQuarters.com. It's a Substack where he writes solely about offensive football, and there are coaches in the industry that read him, and he's pretty respected, and he's a guy I've leaned on a lot over the course of 2.5 years of just learning the game. And so I thought it would be pretty cool not only to talk about the Vikings, not only this upcoming game against the Texans with him, but also just to have a conversation like he and I have when I'm asking him questions about kind of football and the current state of things, because it kind of brings you into this is the type of, just studying and insight that you try to get as you try to cover this thing the right way. So I hope you guys enjoy that. Cody also, beyond being a former coach, having his own website, he's done some work with Caleb Evans in the last year or so, where he's kind of helped him out a little bit in terms of watching film, and they've worked together. And he's also done that with some big-time college players whose names I'll leave out for the sake of probably everybody involved. But, just to respect the guy in the industry. And he loves helping people understand. He speaks very technically sometimes, and so it's great because he speaks in a way that the coaches and the players do that helps someone like me who's having those conversations. So really enjoyed getting to speak with him and just talk defense and kind of go through why scoring's a little bit been down. Brian Flores in general, what he thinks about what they've been able to do. I asked him, does he think this defense can ultimately end up as a top 5 defense? And his answer was pretty interesting. So, as always, thank you guys for listening. I think you guys will enjoy it. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. Those buttons are right there. Apple, Spotify, rate and review and do whatever the heck you do on those things to help us out. But I've enjoyed these. I know the channel as on YouTube specifically has grown a lot, which has been pretty awesome to see. Probably going to do next week a live stream Wednesday night, so look out for that. And then I've got one more surprise for this week. Had a guest that was able to kind of get set up, and I'm going to actually run that. It's a little quicker in the vein of something we did a week or two ago with a guy named Justin Jefferson, and going to have that on Saturday morning. So kind of like an extra tidbit, bonus little preview ish type vibe for the Texans game that I'm looking forward to, but cannot wait for that game. As I talked, if you missed Tuesday's episode where I kind of looked ahead a little bit to the game, I mean, to me, this is really, if CJ Stroud is able to handle Brian Flores' defense here, it's going to say a lot about him. And then the Vikings, can they run the football effectively? Can they move the ball? Those are some of the questions that I can't wait to find out on Sunday. But without further ado, let's just hop into Cody. I hope you guys enjoy this. Cody, welcome to the Alec Lewis Show. How you been, man?
Doing good, man. Glad to be on.
It's good I haven't caught up with you face to face in a minute. I know we talk often as I'm asking you terribly general defensive questions that you're probably like, why is he hitting me up to figure out what dart is with a tackle pulling? But it's good to catch up. What have you been up to? Let the people listening know what you got going. I know you've been working on some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, so obviously grinding away at MatchQuarters. Been doing that since 2016. Doing this full time now, almost for a year, has been really cool. And then also launched a predictive analytics company called Field Vision. So in the first 2 weeks, our model has been right around 60% accurate on all of our player prop stuff. We're also a data company, so we also do have a bunch of data in the app as well. So it's kind of like an everyman's app. So launching that was really cool. We had a heater on the first week. Like, it was unattainable. When I think we were like 18-2 on our picks. Obviously, Daniel Jones screwed us, but I mean, that's our fault. That's nobody else's fault.
Yeah,
so.
you're thinking after week 1, you're 18-2 with props. You're like, we beat Vegas here. It's over probably at that point.
Yeah. And then we come but last week was such a weird week. A lot of the stuff that we got was really close. We're kind of working, and two, like this is first generation. Like, nobody's really doing this, so we're tweaking the model, working at it every day. So I've been busy. I've just been busy watching ball, mostly NFL. So it's been a lot of fun.
By the time the people are getting to this point in the podcast, I've introed you a little bit, but I mean, MatchQuarters is like for me at least, someone who has tried to learn the game over the last 2 years. It has been like a phenomenal resource, and I'll tell this story, and I think it'll be okay. But we were at the Senior Bowl this past spring, and I remember I was standing down on the field with you. I probably shouldn't even have been on the field. Like, I don't think I had the credential to be doing that. But we were standing down there, and there was a big-time D1 assistant coach who coaches cornerbacks and coaches the secondary, who came up to you, introduced himself to you, and he's like, Cody, like, I just want you to know, like, I read a lot of your stuff. You do a heck of a job. And there was also interactions there in Mobile where I was around you, where Vikings coaches were familiar with what you do. So it has been a phenomenal resource, and I mean, you know that. I've told you that. We've gotten lunch and dinner and all that stuff. But I want, like, because I won't have introed this part, but I want you to kind of tell the listeners a little bit of your coaching background, because I think that's where, and I've told you this just in our conversation, that's where I feel like you've separated yourself a lot, is that you literally were in the trenches. So just walk the listeners through, like, your coaching arc to get to the place where you ultimately have gotten where you are now analyzing the game and watching it as, in some ways, as one of the more educated analysts on defense probably in the public space.
Well, I really appreciate it first. So I am the son of a coach. So my dad was a history teacher. He was a football coach, passed the love down to me. I mean, my favorite thing growing up, and some of my best memories are literally just sitting on the couch watching college football and NFL football with my dad, staying up when I was a kid. Like, right now I have a sixth grader, and a 6-year-old, and like staying up and watching, getting to stay up and watch game, the late night Monday night games and stuff. Like, I remember that. And so, like, I've always had a passion for football. And then I've also been, I've always enjoyed writing. But the problem is, when you're a football coach, you don't necessarily want to be an English teacher all the time. And my dad was a history teacher, so I'm just going to be a history teacher. So I took that path. I got really, really lucky, was able to get a position at Baylor as just an unpaid intern. The following season, so 6 months later, the NCAA passed that bylaw that you could add 2 graduate assistants. So now that number went up to 4. By that time, I had basically taken over all of the back end stuff, and I was essentially just doing it for free. Now I was actually going to get my school paid for. So I did that, worked for Phil Bennett, who is around the coaching ranks. He's a legend. I mean, people call him all the time. Every time I talk to him, he's telling me all the crazy places he's been flown to for them to talk about. He's a quarters guy, worked under Dave Wannstedt at Pitt. And so obviously at Baylor, we have to defend the Art Briles system. So I feel like I was, not fun, right?
I wouldn't recommend
when I'm doing a 20-minute. No, but it's like when you're doing a 20-minute 7-on-7 session and you have like 60 plays to break down the next day. Like, that's not fun.
Doesn't sound fun at all. It's like, and I mean, we could talk about this, but it's like, I watch college football a lot now, and it's like Josh Heupel's system at Tennessee, to me, has tentacles of what Art Briles and Baylor used to do. But it was always, I mean, as a kid, it'd be like, how'd they just throw for, like, why are guys open down the field every single play, just streaking open? Never made any sense. So I can't imagine for you, it was, or for the defense there, it was fun, but it's also great learning experience. Like, how do we stop explosive offenses, right?
Yeah, so Briles was so far ahead of the curve. Like, he actually took it to the extent. So he took kind of the Mike Leach system and actually moved it downfield and moved it outside. And what happens, and we start seeing this in 2010, is that we see this move to the uber spread tempo because of the antiquated defenses. So I was early, right?
Yeah.
Like, I got on staff in a place that was, number one, had the ability to get weird, had the player to get weird with, which is Robert Griffin. And then we had all those receivers from that time we had 2 first-round draft picks from that. I think Terrence Williams played in the league, I think, for like 6-7 years with the Cowboys. So we were early, but we had to learn how to defend it because we knew everybody was going to then copycat that off and become part of the Brow system. So Heupel, actually, his roommate in college was Jeff Levy. Jeff Levy married the daughter of Art Briles. That's how that system got there. But so from there, I was perfect timing getting in, bad timing getting out. I was done. I had done my 3 years right before Phil Montgomery leaves to go to Tulsa. How this business works, and I don't think most people outside of it understand, is like when you're a young GA, it's a pipe dream to get a full-time job unless you go with somebody on that staff. And so I went back to, I live in Texas. You can make a really good living here in Texas teaching and coaching. Football is really important here, obviously in the state of Texas. And I live in Dallas, so it's even more important. So being able to come back and being able to feed my family and do that. And so I spent 10 years doing the high school ball thing. COVID was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, just in terms of I didn't realize how hard I had been working and really not taking care of myself and my family and things like that. And MatchQuarters became something that I wanted to just build and see if I could do it full time. And so I had been working since that. I knew I was done probably in 2021. I got to coach with my dad for 1 year. I finally got him. I'm from Kansas City, so I was able to get him to move down here, which is like next to impossible. If you're from out of this state, I think Gus Malzahn said at one time it was easier for him to get the head coaching job at Auburn than it was to get a head coaching job in the state of Texas. So, and he was a legend in Arkansas, like just killing everybody. And even in East Texas, people were like, nah, bro, we're good. We don't need you. So I got him down, I played, and then Substack was really generous. They came and helped me do everything. So that's kind of my career arc and where I am today of talking about the NFL on a full-time basis.
Well, it leads me perfectly. And, I mean, you mentioned Gus Malzahn. You know me. Growing up, we've talked about this. I grew up in Alabama. Gus, I mean, in their offense with Cam Newton was like a lot of my childhood. So I'm very familiar. And, it's always funny because I don't think and this is just for the listeners, like until I covered this game, I thought I knew football. You grow up in Alabama, you think you know it, and then you start to hear people like you and then people I cover talk about like the intricacies of the X's and O's, and it's like, holy bleep. I do not like the complexity of this, which sometimes I wonder, does it have to be this complex? But you see some of the shifts, motions, and all this stuff, and it probably does for each side to counteract. But you talking about your path to MatchQuarters, where you're now writing, obviously, and analyzing and watching film, it leads perfectly into, literally as we're talking, on Thursday, September 19th, you published a story that is it's titled, "Where is the Offense in the NFL?" And it dovetails really perfectly with a lot of the narratives that have swarmed and probably just hovered over the first 2 weeks of this NFL season, and they apply to the Vikings, as the people listening to this know. Like the Vikings defense has been phenomenal, and part of the reason why it applies to what you wrote about today. But I guess just describe for people that haven't read the story yet, that are watching this for the first time, like what was the impetus for this story, and then how did you think about it as you put it together?
Yeah, so it was actually off of I had a tweet that went viral a couple days ago. Somebody, I think his name Mike Young for ESPN, kind of literally just posed a question: where has the offense gone? This is also then a guy who I really respect, Kevin Cole, who's worked for PFF and then now does his own, it's Unexpected Points on Substack. He does his own analytics part. He was like, this is different. Because the pendulum always swings back. In fact, I wrote a book on this whole topic in 2018 called Hybrids, the Making of a Modern Defense. And it goes from really Orange Sparger in the 70s, so the 53 defense, which is essentially, that is the cornerstone of the modern defense. That's where it all begins. There's the 53 defense in the 70s, all the way through to 2018, where we have Iowa State running a three-high system, basically running the odd stack, but from three deep. And so how did we get here, and then what's the projection forward? And so one of the things that we started seeing was, I started noticing in 2018 this move towards too high shell, We started seeing more quarters introduced. We started seeing lower amounts of man coverage. And so just like anything, it's kind of the snowball effect. It's not a problem until it isn't. And now we've got the crash. And so we're actually seeing a lot of the problems that you create by running too high are now having to deal with the offenses who are been used to running the spread. This is what's interesting. I think Andy Reid has said this multiple times, that college is really about 5 years ahead of where the NFL is. I know everybody thinks the NFL, that's where the best schemers are and that's where the best coaches are. That's not necessarily the case, because the NFL level, the talent is really razor thin. So pretty much everybody's the same. That's why the NFL is so great, because year in and year out, you really have no idea where you're looking at, right? We have no idea. I mean, if you would have told me that the Vikings would have been 2-0 at this point, I think I could have said maybe 1-1. I don't know if they beat the 49ers, but you looking now, they're 2-0. They look awesome. They look like one of the best teams, especially with, a guy that, essentially pulled out of, off the street, right? In Darnold. So it's like, I think we're seeing that crescendo, and people are freaking out because we're so used to points, right? And then now we're not scoring points. And there's very succinct reasons why this iteration of the football cycle is different from other iterations that we've seen before.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me. Like, my background, but in covering the Kansas City Royals, I was in Kansas City for the Patrick Mahomes, like let it eat, let it rip down the field to Tyreek Hill type of offense. And then now I think years later, last year, I mean, you saw how much trouble they had moving the football. And obviously, the Kansas City's personnel in general is different. But to me, it is also a reflection of, you mentioned the too high shell. And that has become kind of like the narrative. I think if you watch some of these big shows on some of the major networks, and it's not like throwing shade at anybody. It's just the reality. Like, people have gravitated toward, now defenses are keeping two safeties high, and they're putting a roof over the top of the coverage. It's like, well, this has kind of been happening for multiple seasons,
right?
And it's also it has forced the offensive adaptation, which as you said, is running the football, right? Like that is where this thing has trended a little bit, and where it will continue to. You would agree with that, correct?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. So there's a couple of things, like, if you really want to know what's going on. So we're seeing less big time throws. So these are throws that are over 20 yards. We're seeing those less because teams are playing more zone. In fact, 5 years ago, the NFL was playing about a third of their coverages as cover one. That has now fallen under 20%. Now, I know there's outliers within this. The Cowboys last year, the Browns still this year are running a lot of cover one. The Jaguars are running a ton of cover one. There's a few systems, the Dennis Allen system with the Saints, Schwartz, obviously, with the Browns, that want to run these cover one looks. But for the most part, NFL defenses are just saying, no, we're capping you out. So one of the things that we saw, a big trend, if you have an offensive coordinator friend anywhere, is escort screens. So now we're sending guys out with the running back or with a quick motion to be a lead blocker, because we know we're probably going to check it down. So we've got less big time throws because everybody's playing zone. I think the big underlying topic here that a lot of people don't want to necessarily talk about outside of offensive linemen is the actual offensive line play in the NFL is not great. NFL line play and just offensive line play in general is some of the most technical positions in all of sports. Yes, these are large human beings, but the technique, it's a lot like, in fact, I'm a DB coach, but I would actually argue defensive back, especially at corner and offensive line play have a lot of similarities. And that sounds really strange, but remember, these two positions are the only positions on the football field that go backwards at the start of the play. And so, to me, there's a lot of mechanics and things like that are very similar. Positioning, steps that are very positioner at the top of the play. I think also at the college level, we're seeing really the dumbing down of offense. We've been seeing this really. I mean, we just talked about Art Briles, but like tighter splits, zone runs. We're running just nothing but, deep choice routes, half field reads, RPOs, attacking space, quick strike throws. Offensive lines don't have to block. We're using run blocking as pass blocking now because the ball is coming out quickly. So all of this has kind of created a crescendo that we're seeing now in offensive line play. Then you have the CBA, which is not great. It used to be you could keep those players up there forever, but now, I have a guy I work with that he literally lives across the street from the complex, and he cannot use it in the off season. He can't go over there because technically and legally in his contract, he is not allowed to be on campus because of the way the NFL CBA has been done. So that kind of creates a lot of other problems where you don't get that extra teaching. You have to go somewhere else to get that. Not everybody does that. Offensive line plays very nuanced, so there's only a few people that are really good at it. Then you go to, on top of that, most teams are now utilizing the preseason as really just a time to play their backups. So we're getting sloppier play in the beginning. We're not getting a lot of teaching. And then to go to the schema part of it is the light box, meaning that we're playing a 2-high shell. Even if we are playing cover 3, we're playing from the table, so we're playing from depth. That invites the run. And we're finally at the point where offensive coordinators have thrown their hands up and they say, fine, we're going to run the ball. Well, running the ball slows the game down. You also don't score very many points when you run the ball. You pass to score, you run to win. It's called game control. And the offenses that really understand that, that's where we're at. So if you want to break it all down in terms of like what are the bullet points, those 4 bullet points is where we're at right now and why it's not very good right now.
That's really well said. And part of me, like, I can understand, I guess, over time why it's been hard for offensive coordinators to just shift and run the ball for a couple of reasons. One, like, and you know this, but and I tell friends this all the time, like, what wins football games? Turnover margin and then explosive plays, creating them and limiting them. And passing has been it has been the mode at which you create. Deep passing has been the mode at which you create explosive plays. And when you run the football, it's harder to do that. But to your point, like, if you can be so efficient running the ball that you kind of just have to do it, that's the reality. And the offensive line ties into that because if you have a harder time holding up in pass pro, it's harder to block it up and hit downfield passes, post, go routes that you would probably like to over the top of even the shell coverage. So it's all very interesting, but it's funny because you mentioned like Jim Schwartz and Dennis Allen as kind of outliers in that they want to play man coverage. And I think part of that probably is they've got the personnel or they're close to having the personnel to do it, like Jim Schwartz. You have cornerbacks in Denzel Ward and Martin Emerson Jr. who can hold up against anybody. Dennis Allen, you've got Marshawn Lattimore and Adebo, who are great cover corners. One outlier who we should probably talk about, given this is a Vikings podcast, is Brian Flores, in that his system to me, and I want to get what you think about this, but it's just so, like, and I don't use the word unique, but it feels like actually unique in a space where you have a lot of the Fangio influence, which is a lot of the 2-high shell deception stuff. You have a lot of Mike McDonald influence, which probably ties with Fangio. And Flores, it feels kind of just like unto itself in how he operates. Would you agree with that or not?
No, I would agree. And it started last year, just kind of we're going to blitz through this thing. We're going to play a lot of hot coverage. I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum of just like, we're going to just gap everybody out. We're going to stack receivers. You're going to have to get the ball out. Now, we talked about it too. It got predictable. They also had the most drop 8 coverages in Tampa 2 on third down than anybody else. And so it just kind of became a thing of like, we're going to heat you up early and then we're going to play Tampa 2 behind it. We may change some things up, but you do know what you're going to get. I thought later on the Packers game at the end of the year is probably the best example of just saying, look, we're just going to throw the ball deep. We're going to run by you, and then we're just going to live with it, and that way we can create explosives off of it. You have to now loosen up, so now we can start running the ball and some things like that. But no, when you really look at it, they're now the number 1 team in quarters usage. They're running cover 3 and cover 1 at the absolute least amounts of anybody else. I think they've ran cover 1 5% of the time so far throughout the year, and they've run cover 3 at I think it's like 14%. So we're looking at 19%. We're under 20% 100% in terms of where they're playing close post. Even their cover zero stuff, I would argue, is not even cover zero. It's their hot quarter stuff. So you could lump that into quarters. So we are almost 80% where we are middle of the field open in coverage, which is just, I mean, that is, to use a dirty word, that is collegiate in nature of to just be, hey, we're just going to play quarters and we're going to play too high and all the different structures off of that. So yeah, what they're doing now though is the fruits of last year, and this is what we talked about this.
Yeah.
Of it's going to be difficult, but you just don't have the horses up front in order to do what he really wants to do.
Talking about last year,
now,
right? Yep.
Right. Now, last year. Now, with an off season, all the additions that they've had, having a linebacker like Cashman, who is just phenomenal in coverage, is a great box linebacker, having a pass rush now and being able to rotate guys throughout, I think is something that, they did not have last year. This is the craziest stat. Last year, they blitzed more than anybody else in the NFL. So they sent 5 or more than anybody. It wasn't even close. They were also dead last in pressure rate.
Wow.
So they weren't getting any pressure at all. Now that's completely flipped. So I think they're leading the league in sacks. They're getting a pressure, which is helping the secondary. That's the thing. The chicken or the egg is always, is it pass rush or is it coverage? Well, as a DB, I will tell you, it is pass rush. If you have pass rush, you become a really good corner because either the ball is tipped, it's a bad throw. He's hurrying and throwing into bad spots. The whole Will Levis at the end of a game, just throwing it up to the defenders. You'll get that. So to me, that's where I think they're very different than they were last year. And then the scheme. And just give it to Brian Flores of just saying, hey, I'm not going to run Bill Belichick's defense just because that's just what I've done all the time. I'm going to make it my own, and he has. He did it in Miami, and now he's doing it again in Minnesota.
Yeah, and I give credit. Yeah, Flo, I mean, obviously, like last year, I think it's been well reported. Like he spent time in Pittsburgh, and when he was with the Steelers, he spent time with Pat Narduzzi and kind of learned a lot of the hot coverage stuff that you're talking about, where it looks like they're about to just blitz all and play man, but it's really not man. It's like zone eyes. They're playing with eyes on the quarterback. Very interesting. So he was willing to learn that type of college system. And then I would also say, like, the credit, in my opinion, too, a lot of it should go to the staff as well. Like, what's interesting to me is you have a guy in Mike Saravo, who's the linebackers coach, who spent a lot of time with Phil Snow, who was in college at Baylor. And so he has a lot of ideas in that regard, and Mike Saravo was in Carolina with Phil where they did some different stuff. I think you also give credit to Durante Jones, the secondaries coach, who spent time at LSU. You got a guy, Michael Hutchings, who's at USC. There's just a lot of different guys who are in college who have a lot of different ideas, which is a little, I mean, I don't know how common that is across the NFL, but to go back to the stat that you gave and just to kind of synthesize it from how I'm hearing you, it's like last year they were having to take players out of coverage to rush the passer, and they weren't even able to rush the passer. This year, they're applying, they're removing the people they have to send at the quarterback, and they're getting more pressure in doing so. And that is a credit to the personnel, right? like that. It's kind of right. I mean, that's what if you could design it, that's how you would go about it.
Yeah, and I think, too, the schematic fluidity. So they want to be able to run quarters, whether it's in base 3-4 or we're sending 6 and we can now run hot quarters. So they want to be able to run that. This is a big thing. Schematic fluidity is a big thing. Like Mike McDonald has talked about it with the Ravens, and then now with what he's been able to do with the Seahawks, of just being able to use different packages, but we're playing the exact same defense. So it looks complex to the offense, but it's very simple for our players to execute, which again, I go back to what we talked about earlier with why we're seeing less offensive output of now in the NFL can't just be the drinking buddy of the DC. You have to be able to teach. You have to be able to be a teacher. You have to have some nuance to you. Well, how do you then even level that up even more, it's by having the schematic fluidity of having similar things. I call it interchangeable parts. Like I think about it. Eli Whitney, interchangeable parts, being able to take something and just rechange the parts to create something new. You now have that where you can take puzzle pieces from different spots, and we can kind of put this together. At the end of the day, football, you talk about football does not have to be as complex as a lot of times that we make it. A lot of times you hear jargon, coach speak. People are just trying to talk over you so you don't ask questions. When in reality, it's really about geometry. It's about angles. It's about, matchups. Because at the end of the day, it's about the players on the field. So it's about the matchups. Where am I doing? It's players over plays, letting my guys eat and not necessarily, putting a square peg in a round hole, which has been the NFL model for generations. I mean, think about how many great players have never made it in the NFL just for a simple fact that they didn't fit the mold of what somebody thought that they should, or didn't fit the defense instead of changing for the player that you have.
Yeah. You said interchangeable parts, and it's funny, like I went back and watched the film of the game against the 49ers, and you've got Harrison Smith lined up on the line of scrimmage, then running a deep quarter. You've got Byron Murphy, the cornerback, lined up as if he's pressed up playing man, and then he's running the deep half, and it's Stephon Gilmore's running the deep half on the other side. It's just like, who is where? Why are they there? It's I'm not trying to rhyme, but it's at any time anybody could be anywhere, and it's why Brock Purdy says crazy scheme, but it's also why, to me at least, like in an era where like there has been a ton of just creativity and fluidity, like Brian Flores, it feels like they are kind of at the tip of the iceberg, because it's not really copying anybody. It feels like they are kind of like charting their own path. And I also want to say this too, and I don't want to shift the conversation entirely, but they've had guys, like you said, players not plays. They've had guys on the interior of the front, Harrison Phillips, Jonathan Bullard, who can stop the run without a ton of help. And I feel like that's an underrated aspect of what they're able to do overall. And I don't know if you'd agree with that, but it feels like their ability to stop the run without extra bodies up there has allowed them to be as creative as they've probably been.
No, and you're 100% correct. Like that's the modern defense right now. That's why interior defense linemen are getting paid, is that you have to be able to stop the run and allocate numbers in the back end. And that's what the Vikings finally are able to do. The run defense was never really the issue last year. It was manufacturing pressure against the pass. When you can't do that and those quarterbacks are playing 7-on-7, it don't matter. They're just back there patting the ball. They're just waiting. So even if you have good coverage, it doesn't really matter, because it's overtime. Like if they've got 3 seconds to throw in the NFL, like you're watching him make a lot of completions. It just is what it is. So I think now what they're able to do is, we don't always have to send 5. We can send 4 now. We can and be just as competent, because either our pressure scheme is working, or we have the edge rushers now that are able to do that. And I think that that's kind of the thing, where you have a Jonathan Grenard who can create pressure. And then Van Ginkel is this kind of just joker player that can play coverage, that he can rush if you need him to. He's great against the run. I mean, I think he even was playing off-ball linebacker for a couple snaps. So, I mean, what you're doing, though, is you're creating what are called defensive formations. We always talk about formations as terms of offense, but defenses can create formations as well. That's why, Brock Purdy is talking about, like, yeah, it's crazy defense. I have no idea where anybody is, because one guy is in one spot, and then the next week, he's in the exact same spot. So I'm like, I know exactly what you're doing. And then he does something completely different. And so I think that, to me, is where that cat and mouse game, and where I think Flores is really, really good at, of just trying to change different parts around and different things around to give different looks.
Let me ask you this. C.J. Stroud against Brian Flores. That matchup brings what to your mind?
It's going to test the young quarterback. It's how good can he be against the blitz? How cool, calm, and collected. He's typically been relatively good. I think we if you kind of see it. If it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? He is one of those, like, he looks like a really good quarterback. He plays like a really good quarterback. He's probably going to ascend to be one of the elite quarterbacks. Like I never understood what people didn't see at the college level. I always thought he was quarterback number one. I know the weird mental test thing, which is BS anyway. And the people that do that test will even tell you, like, people were talking about it completely wrong. But his processing skills, what he did against Georgia, I think it was, when I saw that, I was like, that's who I'm drafting. And so that will be the thing. Can they get him to, see ghosts? Can they get him to see things? Because there was a clip that went, him talking to Jalen Johnson about, hey, man, you shouldn't be saying that stuff about your palms coverage to Richard Sherman. Because he's watching that stuff. He studies the game. So this is going to be a really good test for Flores of, hey, what can we show you some things that you think we're going to get you to think that something's happening. I think it's also a great opportunity to illustrate their pass rush. They've allowed the third most sacks in the NFL so far. So this is something that I think that the Vikings have a good opportunity to showcase what they can do on defense.
It is like kind of it feels kind of like a final boss. Like if CJ Stroud can overcome like whatever he's going to see from Flores, it's like, then what? If he can handle this, what can he not handle? So I'm glad you mentioned that. Just to flip it, because this will be partly a preview in some capacity, like DeMeco Ryans and how they play defense. For people who, we've talked so much about flow and the way they operate. It feels like DeMeco and coming from that 49ers tree, they're a little more like static, but they just do it with athletes. But how would you describe what makes his defense go beyond? Maybe it is just a personnel of when you have Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson, and some of these guys, you can go. But what do you think about his defense, both the structure of it and what he does that has been successful?
Well, he does come from that. People get mad at me because I call it the Shanahan defense because he can only have offense, can't have defense. But let's be honest, it is the Shanahan defense. He put it in place in 2018 with Robert Saleh. They kind of took the Pete Carroll quarter system. They took the Pete Carroll's quarter system and actually leaned into it. Pete Carroll's known for the Legion of Boom, cover three. A lot of people would argue that Pete Carroll ruined defenses in the NFL for a long, long time just because they were so dominant and so many people were trying to manufacture it. But they took kind of the wide nine quarters aspect of it, and instead of running cover three, they really wanted to run more cover one. So when you watch the 49ers, when you look at them analytically, the Jets are in the same boat as well. They're running cover one at high levels and quarters at high level. Now, I say they don't want to run cover three. I mean they don't want to run cover three at above league average like we see. So cover three is still king in the NFL. That's not going to change. But you do get these tendencies where people want to actually kind of stray away. So the two top quarters teams in the NFL right now are the Vikings and the Texans. And so the Texans, because of the personnel they have, Lassiter, who they picked up in the draft. Stingley is another on-ball corner that's really good. They have two good safeties. And then I think the key cog in all of this was moving Petrie back down into the nickel, where if you watch 21 Baylor at all with Dave Aranda and Ron Roberts, that dude was everywhere. And so to me, that's what they want to utilize: quarters coverage. They want to play some man coverage because they have the dudes, and then they want to get that in those wide nines, and they really want to let those defensive ends eat. That's why the big topic right now is the Patriots and the Jets. Patriots have a really good run game. The Jets kind of give up the run. They kind of let you run. And it goes back to the analytics part. A 5-yard run in the NFL on first down gets you to 2nd and 5. Well, 2nd and 5 is a passing down. A 5-yard pass in the NFL could be a 5-yard pass. It could also be a 50-yard touchdown. So it goes back to that explosive play. So passing is not necessarily going to go away. We're post-spread era, man. We're not going back to Neanderthal ball days of the 90s when I was watching Marty Schottenheimer give the ball to Chris Johnson for 3 yards in a cloud of dust. So it's I don't think we're going to go back to that. But I do think that running the ball now is going to be central focus of that, and that's something that I think the Vikings can take advantage of, is just because of the way that defensive structure is made. It's got athletic linebackers that they want. I think what do they got? Oto.
Aziz Al-Shaair.
I think I said that name right.
Yeah. Henry to Oto.
Shaair,
yeah.
Both Toto, yes. Both very super athletic. So if you can run at them and you can get downhill, I think that there's an opportunity there. So the running game's going to be big, which again feeds into Darnold not having to carry the team. The more that Darnold doesn't have to carry the team and can play action, you're ahead of the chains. He's not stressing. I think to me that is the recipe for success going forward.
Let me end you with this. How good do you think this Vikings defense, do you think they can be a top 5 defense? I mean, I don't know if that's too, where do you, I mean, you're totally prognosticating here, so I'm putting you in a tough spot. But, do you think it can be that good?
I think with who they have, that yes, I think one of the most underrated signings was the fact that they let Andrew Van Ginkel walk out of the door in Miami. The guy is a workhorse. And I think look, we get enamored with the sexy guys like the edges that make a lot of sacks, Micah Parsons, Myles Garrett, and Aiden Hutchinson, and Max Crosby. And we get so enamored with these guys that a lot of times it's like the other guy on the other side needs to be just as productive. That's why I think the edges at Dallas are so good, because Tank Lawrence doesn't mind stopping the run, which allows Micah Parsons to do his job. And I think when you look at even like a place like the 49ers, one of their major problems this year is they got Bosa. Name another guy. It's like, so they've lost a lot of talent there. So when you have a guy like a Jonathan Grenard who you can just unleash, right? And then you got his backup, or you can bring on Dallas Turner, who's just a pass rush specialist. Now you're really cooking, and now you can use different things. So I do really think, especially because they cleaned up the inside too, Ivan Pace Jr. doesn't have to be on the field 100% of the time. You can bring in Blake Cashman and let him kind of be in there. I think Asamoah, they've used him really as more of kind of like a blitzer, which I think it feeds into his strength. So you can kind of bring him in. You just now have options. And so I do think going forward, I think if the secondary can stay healthy and your starters can play pretty well, I think this is definitely a top 10 defense and can push for a top 5 and be an elite defense, because they are going to need to be, because at some point Darnold's going to regress to the mean, and he's going to be an average quarterback on some of these games, and you're going to need the defense to win you a game.
I mean, it's an amazing defensive transformation in 2 years. I mean, really, it is. We're talking they could push for top 5, and I believe it. I legitimately. And it's funny you mentioned Van Ginkel. I talked to a Dolphins executive right after that signing. He's like, that was my favorite player on the team. So it hurts, but he struggled through injuries. But yeah, I mean, the versatility of you watch Van Ginkel drop into coverage, and he looks just like an off-ball linebacker who can cover, and yet he's an edge rusher who has a 14% pressure rate off the edge. It is ridiculous. But the transformation and just the ability, I think, of Brian Flores, the staff, the personnel department, to identify the fits for this system and what they want to do, they deserve a lot of credit for it. So it's been pretty cool to watch. Cody, I said 30. I've kept you 9 minutes longer because the conversation was phenomenal. But I think people will enjoy just the way that you think about the game and the complexity at which, I've told you this. Sometimes we go down these rabbit holes, and I'm like, my head is spinning. We're talking 3/2, capping the verticals, and it can get complex. But I appreciate how much you've helped kind of me learn the game. I've enjoyed the times at the Combine and Senior Bowl we've gotten to hang out. So thanks for hopping on. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime, Alec. I'll come on here and talk Vikings with you.
Sweet. All right, that'll do it for Cody. So appreciate it. Be good, man. And that will do it for the Alec Lewis Show. I appreciate you guys listening as always. If you missed it, and I should have mentioned this at the top, but I did not, wrote a story earlier this week on Fran Tarkenton. And he's 84. He still works every day. And I spent a couple hours with him in Atlanta a little bit ago and wrote about just that. I mean, what is it like to spend a couple hours with Fran Tarkenton? It is a one-of-a-kind kind of 2 hours, and I try to bring you into his office in that conversation and really enjoy doing that. It seemed like the readers had fun with that story. Some of them loved it. I think some of them, maybe they hated the writing. Maybe they felt a certain way about the way kind of things came across. But no, if you have not seen that, you can check that out at The Athletic, where I do my day job covering the Vikings. But yeah, that'll do it for us here. As I said at the top, we're going to have a little bit of an extra surprise for you Saturday morning. So check for that. It is a Vikings player who will be on, and that will be my only teaser. But that'll do it for the Alec Lewis Show. As always, thank you guys. Enjoy the heck out of the game this weekend. It should be a good one.